Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the Mirror of Intimacy monthly webinar series. Today is Monday, March 4th, and I'm Dr. Alexandra Katehakis. Welcome. So our topic today is vision, which is one of my favorite topics. And the quote this morning is from Carl Gustav Jung, who said, "Your vision will become clear only when you can look into your heart. Who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes." So before we take a few minutes to talk about that, because I'm going to read it again just to let it seep in a little bit, I want to remind you that if you have any questions at all, you can text me in the chat box on your screen. And also, if you have any questions or concerns about sex, love, intimacy issues, feel free to call our intake line anytime at 310-842-9903, and somebody's standing by to take your call. So again, the topic today is vision. And Jung says, your vision will become clear only when you can look into your own heart. And so what is he really talking about there other than this? You know, when we think about vision, we think about obviously seeing and seeing outside and seeing the outside world. But vision is highly complicated, and there are many, many different aspects to having vision, or different definitions of it, shall we say. So when we stop looking outside of ourselves for answers and really start turning towards our own heart, the truth is always there, but it gets obfuscated by certainly trauma or distortion, or people that told us not to follow our hearts or intuitions. But so often we're trying to look for answers intellectually, and that is exhausting and often does not get us where we want to go at all. So when you really ask yourself, when you really look into your own heart and say, what do I really want? What feels good in my body when I ask that question? You'll know by listening to your heart and not your head. And Jung continues to say, he who looks outside dreams, who looks inside awakes. And so it's true, when we're looking outside and we're musing or we're in fantasy or dreaming, that is also an incredibly useful proposition, this notion of dreaming and letting our minds wander, which is very different than trying to figure it out intellectually. But if you're just dreaming, you're not really getting what you want. When you really look inside, you start to awake to the truth of who you are. And the answers to your questions are always there. So when we can look beyond appearances, in other words, and we start to recognize that we exist as one expression here, there seems to be one heart, one mind, one passion, one love, that's part of a universal knowing, a universal experience. And how many times have you been on a beautiful hike or at the ocean or in the mountains by a stream or skiing, when you have this expansive sense of being connected to something much bigger than you are, bigger than this small self. And that expansion is about connecting to sort of the essence of the divine, if you will, that there is something much, much bigger taking place here. And yet we're all so sort of sewn into that bigger intelligence, if you will, that bigger heart, that bigger essence, that bigger love. So when we imagine and plan our future with wisdom, that means we're using our intuition, our vision, and our vision is our capacity to see into the future. And so oftentimes when people are struggling with mental illness or addiction, meaning mental illness, you know, extreme anxiety disorders or depression, or again with addiction, it's very difficult to have the capacity for vision. It's hard to see into the future because typically there's a collapse in the nervous system that's all about this this state of pain, generally, the state of depression, or this state of addiction and getting into the next addictive experience or getting the next addictive substance. Or if a person struggles with anxiety, their nervous system is actually primed in a in a high arousal state, and that high arousal state starts to trick the mind into thinking that it's sick or that there's something wrong with it, when actually it's just an elevation of everything that's going on in the body. And so those states have us, whether we're in what we would call a hyper-aroused state or a hypo-aroused state, meaning an over-regulated or collapsed state, have us collapsing down into that state. And those are survival states. They don't allow us to dream, to imagine, to vision what kind of life we would have. But when we are actually regulated enough, when our systems are on line in the way they're supposed to be, then we have a calmness or a stillness internally that allows these higher cortical functions to start to do what they're designed to do, which allow us to have really superpowers, if you will, the power to know things without intellectually knowing them. And this comes in all forms. It comes in the intuition of knowing that you're going to see somebody, or you're going to hear from somebody, or thinking about seeing somebody and then they show up and you haven't seen or heard from them in a long time. It also allows us to see the possibility of the kind of future we would like to have, without devolving into some dissociative fantasy. So these are very fine lines along the way, and they have to do with how regulated our hearts are, our nervous systems, our ability to engage socially, to give and receive feedback without being reactionary. So the organism has to be in quite a clear state of homeostasis in order for this capacity for mental vision to show up for us. So if you have any questions along the way, as usual, feel free to ask them. If any statements come into your mind, or thoughts, or things that you relate to, or experiences you've had, please feel free to share them. So we are, each of us, unique human beings, highly unique. Our fingerprints are not alike. We're so different and so similar at the same time. And when we are connected in the ways I'm talking about, there is a distinct longing to merge with something deeper than ourselves. And I would call that emerging with the infinite. And oftentimes with another human being. And in that merging with another human being, we are also seeking an infinite experience, an experience of losing ourselves to another, whether it's in a deep, loving embrace or a sexual experience. But there is a losing of the ego, if you will, a losing of self-referencing, of I, me, mine, my preferences, all of that. Seems to melt away as we're just in the realm of the body, and what many of us would also express as the spiritual. So each of us has our own path, and each of us has to discover what that path is and how we get to this capacity to improvise and improve the mental vision, so we're striking our full potential. And what I'm talking about really requires that people have done, I think, a tremendous amount of work on their psychological pains. If a person comes from a less than optimal upbringing in which there was neglect or emotional or physical or sexual abuse, then these capacities are going to be blunted. It doesn't mean that you'll never have them again. It just means that they're very hard to get to because certain circuits and systems are not working optimally. So first and foremost, you have to clean house. You have to do your psychological work. You have to get in touch with yourself and with who you are and who you once were, more importantly, what my friend and colleague Marilyn Murray calls our original child, that child that was never touched, that child that came into this world perfect and unique and whole and filled with joy. That is the place we want to return to after we've done our psychotherapeutic work. So This visioning can take place singularly, by yourself as a single person, and in fact, I think is necessary before we get into a relationship with someone else. But once we are in a relationship and we're in a conscious relationship, meaning we talk about who we are, what our vision is for our life together, what we want individually, yes, individually and as a couple. And I would even say separately and as a couple. Because people have different interests and our interests change as time goes on. And can we give our partners and ourselves the dignity of that kind of expansion, of exploration, without having to do every single thing together? So, for example, if somebody is really into cooking or baking pies and the other person has no interest in that whatsoever, it shouldn't stop the person who loves it from going and taking classes and entering pie contests or whatever it is that is joyful for them. So this partnership requires both a togetherness and a separateness. But when couples hold a vision for what they want in their lives as partners, that is a commitment to a conscious relationship. And in that way, we're not just allowing life to happen to us. And I think too often we tend to go to sleep on ourselves or get lazy. And, there's that bumper sticker, that saying that, shit happens. Well, it happens. Yes, there are random acts and there are things that happen that are out of our control, certainly. But if our entire life is left to that sort of randomness, then we're going to get random in our lives. And that is very different than holding a vision and saying, this is my vision for my life. This is the course that I'm setting. And along the way, I'm going to do everything I can to bring that vision to fruition. So a lack of vision really leaves life up to chance. And part of having a vision is having goals. So really you have to have the vision first. So if my vision is that I want to live in Tahiti, and I make a collage, let's say, of beautiful photographs of the beach and huts and working in hospitality while I'm there, or whatever way of working and earning a living a person does when they're at that place. And all of the things that go with that, perhaps eating pineapple, but also weathering storms like hurricanes. So not just some pie in the sky fantasy, but a real realistic view of living in Tahiti. That's what my vision is for my life. Now I have to do everything I can on this end to start to bring that vision to fruition. Maybe I have to work 2 jobs, a day job and a night job, in order to start saving money so that I can go do that. Maybe I also am going to have to learn a different language in order to do that. Let's say I want to work in hospitality at a beautiful hotel. Maybe I have to go back to school and get a certification in hospitality to even be hireable for something of that sort. So there are a lot of work I have to do along the way, a lot of goals I have to set to bring that vision to fruition. But if my focus is strictly on Tahiti and everything I'm doing is in service of bringing that vision to fruition, I can achieve that vision. Somebody says, it seems like on one side you have a victim mentality that's closed off, and then on the other side, a life where you can control or create your life and tap into an abundance mentality. Is this similar to the law of attraction or different? I would say that it's similar, and not everyone starts with a victim mentality. So if you have a victim mentality, then that's a mentality of lack and limitation and deprivation. Then you have to first start by looking at where that came from, how that came to pass, why it's still a narrative or a belief system that you hold to be true, and what you can do to intervene on that. And then in order to create this abundance mentality that you're talking about, you have to move your feet. You have to put things into action. This is not about being dissociative due to trauma and being hurt terribly, and then living in some fantasy, which is another form of dissociation about some, fantastic world, because there's a grandiosity in that that is not grounded in reality. So I'm talking about the realistic steps that one needs to take in order to realize the vision. And someone says, it seems to me a vision must be bigger than who you know yourself to be, otherwise it's a goal. And I would say that's not necessarily true. A vision is something that stretches you, but it shouldn't be so unusual that it's completely out of your realm of possibility. So if somebody, let's say, finished 2 years of community college, and then someone said, well, you should be a neurosurgeon. And let's say that person's 35 years old and they don't even know what a neurosurgeon is, or they don't know much about it. That is so unusual. It's going to be very difficult to hold a vision for that. A vision is something that we hold that we're passionate about. So I remember in my 20s having a vision of living in a house or in a space that had a lot of light to it, a lot of windows and bright light. It had a feeling tone, a feeling sense to it. But it wasn't for maybe 35 years later that I moved into a space that replicated that idea of what I wanted. And it wasn't so much a hardcore, structure that I had in my mind. It was a feeling state. And that brings me back to this question about vision boards. Vision boards are like collages where you create and find actual images of things that represent the thing that you most want. And again, it can be colors, it can be places, it can be things, but it's a representation. So again, I think about 2 or 3 years ago, I made a vision board of physical health, because there was a time when I was really in physical good shape. And then there was a whole bunch of time where I was barely working out, maybe once a week. And it was the time when I was writing quite a bit, which is very sedentary, just sitting at a desk. And the only thing I was really moving were my fingers. And so when that, sort of phase of my life was finished, I thought, wow, I really want to get healthy again. And so I just bought a piece of, poster board, and I started cutting out images of magazine that represented physical health, endurance, strength. I was also getting colds a lot because I was on planes a lot. And so I wanted to not get sick again. And thus far, I would say this year I have not had a cold. It's probably because we, haven't had a horrible cold and flu season either this year. But nonetheless, the idea was that I could imagine enough. It was a realistic conceptualization for me to be physically fit again. And so I set myself to that vision. And then, the goal was losing a little bit of weight, taking certain classes. I mean, I had to show up. I had to go to the gym. I couldn't just have a vision board and be at home sitting around watching TV. So it really should be something that you feel passionate enough about that you believe you could attain it. And it doesn't mean there's not going to be a lot of hard work, and there's not going to be, and that you must set goals along the way. So Amy says, I recently started using Pinterest to create Envision My Dream, which is a ranch life, which is fantastic. I think a lot of people, create some pretty beautiful artwork on that forum. And that's a way to keep sort of curating your life, as long as it doesn't just stay, in the world of the web, that you are looking at those things and maybe taking stock of them and saying, okay, what one thing do I have to do today to move in the direction of that vision? And what are the obstacles that are in my way? And are those obstacles real, or is it something I can do to get past one of those obstacles? And then the question then is, and when am I going to do it? So what do I want? It should actually go in this, if you were to put them in columns, what do I want? What is the obstacle? What do I have to do to get past the obstacle, and when am I going to do it? So am I going to do one thing this week and just slowly kicking the can down the road? Michelle writes, some people say to make vision boards and leave them alone. Others say make the board and spend time with it every day. Do you have suggestions as to what approach helps you more? Sometimes I feel resistance when I look at my vision board, but notice things I want that are not there. Yet, does that create negative resistance energy towards our goals and vision? How can we ease that feeling? So nice to see you too, Michelle. Thank you. I actually came across your name recently and thought about you just on Friday, as a matter of fact. So this is one of those examples that I was talking about earlier. So to answer your question, there was a study done at Yale University many, many years ago where they tracked people who set goals. It was a longitudinal study, and those who didn't set goals. And at the end of 10 years, the people that set goals were the most successful. And I myself have had this experience where I set goals, or I make that vision board that I was talking about, the workout health one, and then I don't look at them. I actually forget about them. And then the vision board I came across recently, and I was like, oh, I accomplished this, because I made it 2 years ago and it's still kind of hanging around. And so it's time to make a new one for something different. So I would say to use a light touch with it, that you have a vision for, let's say, someone use the example of having a ranch life. So having a ranch life is a big vision. You have to buy property, I would imagine. And so you want to create the board for that, but you also want to start to get clear about where you want to live, which part of the country you want to live in. You have to look at real estate prices. You've got to go to that place and start driving around and seeing what's available, and then how your money's going to work with that. So it really is, I think the negative resistance can be a feeling that, oh, this is now something I have to do, as opposed to I'm holding this vision in my consciousness. And if I'm in a relationship, my partner is holding it with me. And so we're just making a space for this to unfold. And sometimes it can take years or decades, because if you are in the day-to-day process of working and making a living and being a householder and running your life, it's not going to feel like you're anywhere near Tahiti yet. But if everything has been geared towards getting to Tahiti, you'll wake up one day and you'll say, oh my gosh, I actually saved some money. I've been buying Tahitian clothes. I finished that certification in hospitality. I think it might be time to go. And then you're up against another issue of, do I still want to go after all this time? So paying attention to the notion of be careful of what you ask for, because you might get it, is important too. So I think you have to go with what feels best for you. If it's something that you put on your home office wall above your desk so that it reminds you of your vision, or if it's something that you just, you do it once and then it's done, and you don't really revisit it, is okay too, because I've done both, but I certainly don't study them. I've also had the practice of setting goals at the beginning of every year and putting them in a journal and stating those goals and intentions around the new year, and then not looking at them again for a year. And when I look back on them, it's like, wow, those things actually happened. Because I think when we are on the way to something, we already know it, and we're already putting those things into play. We just don't recognize them as such, because we get into the grandiose fantasy of, what we want it to be right now. And we don't remember that every day, one thing that you do every day that moves you towards your goal matters. Whether it's a phone call, whether you deposited $10 out of your paycheck into your savings account, or you looked up one thing online towards that end, all of those little tiny things add up. And that is, I think, the challenge of staying out of fantasy and grandiosity, is being present with what is. So Amy says, I go riding weekly. I spend 3 hours a week at the ranch. Well, that's great. That's a way to keep reminding yourself that this is the life that you want. Okay, so I was talking too about If your vision for your life is clear, then you really will manifest your desires. And I had a vision of creating a center for healthy sexuality that treated sexuality on a continuum in 2005. It's now 2019. And I'm here to tell you that getting from there to here was no picnic. It's been unbelievably grueling, difficult, exhausting work, without a doubt. And so every day it was just about doing what was in front of me. And I continued to say yes to the opportunities that showed up in front of me. And, over time, the thing built itself, certainly not by itself, with a lot of people working really hard for a really long period of time. But here I am. So this didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen because I was just at home while a bunch of people were doing the work for me. It was exhausting work. And at times I felt like I was in the weeds. At times I felt like, what was I doing? Or I shouldn't have done this. All the things that people feel when it starts to get really, really hard. And you probably all know that the documentary Free Solo won Best Documentary of the Year this year at the Oscars. And if you haven't seen that movie, you might want to take a look at it. Because when you talk about grueling, when you talk about getting halfway up something and there's no way you can go down, and you certainly can't quit, because in his case, if he quit, he died. So you have no choice but to keep going forward and believing yourself. And even when it gets really, really difficult, when you're halfway through the tunnel and you can't see light behind you or in front of you, the only sane thing to do is to go forward. Because going backwards is really painful and difficult and actually probably dangerous. Certainly in the case of the guy that was, climbing the face of a sheer rock wall with no ropes. But I think that movie is worth seeing because it's a fantastic metaphor for vision and for setting goals, and in his case, for doing the impossible. But most of us do the impossible all the time. When you think about just getting through any proposition you've gotten yourself into, for those of you that have completed 4 years of school, that was impossible. It seemed like a good idea at the beginning because everybody said that's what you're supposed to do. But when you're a freshman at the end of freshman year, most freshmen are exhausted. A lot of them drop out because they can't handle it. So it takes a lot of mettle and fortitude to keep going in the face of difficulty. Jeff says, hi, Alex, I'm at a point in my life where coming up with a fun activity feels like a major life goal, I imagine. I've built so much of my life around work and my relationships throughout my life. My core passions of cycling and music are great, but they are more like vocations. Any guidance on how I can reach for the next step of creating simple, childlike fun? Well, that's a very interesting and different kind of vision and goal, isn't it? So I would challenge you to see if you can put your ambition aside and see if you can engage in activities that aren't competitive, and also that you don't make the activity competitive. So for example, if you can do things like, play on the beach, and there are lots of ways you can play on the beach. You can throw a frisbee. Now, of course, there's competition frisbee. You can play smash ball, which if you're not very good at it is super goofy and fun. You can get a boogie board and ride waves and not take up surfing because that could become competitive and athletic. So find the things that children do. Skip down the beach and see what that does for you, or skip down the street. Find the things that are most playful. You could even get, a beach ball and play beach volleyball with that, because beach balls don't play the way a real volleyball plays. So anything that intervenes on your desire for perfectionism and also to become competitive is the best way for you to go. Get a kite and fly a kite. Find the things that children do and do those things. Someone writes, hi, I tend to either overestimate what my goals take to accomplish. I overestimate what my goals take to accomplish and not start, or underestimate what they take to accomplish and get discouraged? Do you have any suggestions for proper mental calibration, or does it come down to taking baby steps? Well, there is this proposition that Dan Sullivan, who created Strategic Coach, talks about, that I think I've talked about before, called minding the gap. And he says all too often, people, and especially entrepreneurs, are always, have a to-do list, the length of their body practically. And so it feels like the work is never done, and there are these grandiose ideas that have to get done. And his idea is that at the end of every day, you look at what you did accomplish today, and you look at what you have won today. So for me, maybe my win today is this webinar. That I had a good conversation with all of you. I feel like it went well, and that's good enough. It doesn't have to be setting the world on fire. Maybe I had a goal today of working out, and I got to the gym and I worked out. And so it's good enough. So this idea that, if my goal is that I have to have a six-pack and weigh a certain amount by the end of the month, then I'm not going to the gym. I'll be exhausted. I'll be too afraid that I'm going to hurt myself or I'm going to get sick. So I just won't do it. That's one of those goals that you're talking about, that I'm going to procrastinate because they're just way too big. And if I set a goal for myself that all I have to do is, walk around my office, and that's my big exercise program, I'm probably not going to get much done either. But if I do say, I'm going to get a Fitbit and make sure I take a walk around the block when I have a break, and I'm going to do these other things, then these are small bits and pieces. And yes, I would say the notion of baby steps is what we're talking about here. It's one day at a time. What one thing can you do to start to play? So if we go back to Jeff's example of play, I would say to you, Jeff, maybe you should get a yo-yo and keep it in your desk at work and play with your yo-yo, or get some of those, bubbles that you blow bubbles to your coworkers, because I don't think you can I think there's competition yo-yo, but probably not bubble blowing. So just the little, absolute little things that you can do that move you in the direction of your vision and of your dream. So if you don't have a partner, but visualize what you want in a partner, it's likely that such a partner will show up in your life. One of my favorite books is by my friend and colleague, Catherine Woodward Thomas, called Calling in the One. And Catherine maintains that you can call in anything with this book, because it's a crazy example of making a commitment to focus 100% of your attention on the thing that you want the most for a certain period of time. And there are exercises in that book for doing that. So if you get clear about what your vision is for a partner, what you want in them, and really their qualities, probably not what they look like, because you never know what package what you want is going to come in. But if they're qualities of kindness, a certain type of spirituality, a certain level of education, sense of humor, and you really hold true to that, and you date and you say no a lot. You've got to be willing to say no, so that when yes shows up, you know that it's really yes. Then you will be able to manifest the vision of the kind of partnership you want also. So remember that time doesn't work in the spiritual dimension. Time works in the human direct dimension, and that's where we get impatient. When I started Center for Healthy Sex in 2005, I did not know it was going to take this long. Or I probably wouldn't have done it. And I think that's true with anything in life. I think if we really know what we're getting into, we wouldn't do it. We wouldn't have children. We wouldn't buy a house. We wouldn't climb Mount Kilimanjaro. We just wouldn't do any of it, because, like I said, halfway up the mountain or through the process, you start to wonder, what have I gotten myself into? And that's why it's the day-to-day, one foot in front of the other, one step at a time mentality that gets us to where we want to go. So you want to plant your seeds. You want to plant your seeds for abundance, prosperity, happiness, joy, by stating affirmations every day, by by setting goals, by accomplishing little goals, by looking back on your day every day in gratitude, and by looking at what you did accomplish today. And those are the things that will set the course to keep you on track for accomplishing your vision. So I would ask you today to ask yourself, well, what is my vision for my life? Because it's such a big question, and it's a really hard question also. I'm not saying that this is easy. It's a question that's often sort of stopped me in my tracks or made me feel like I just wanted to pass out. Like, how am I supposed to know what I want 5 years from now? I don't even know what I want for lunch today. But it's really difficult because you are growing new areas of your brain when you challenge yourself in this way. And so take time throughout this week to sit quietly with your attention on that question. Maybe get a little notepad and carry it with you all week. And whether you're sitting down to have a coffee at lunch, or you're taking a walk on a break, or you're even in your car and you're just sitting in traffic and something pops into your head, write down any thoughts or feelings or sensations or images that come to you. You know, for me right now, I have this vision, this ideal that I want somewhat of a quiet or bucolic life. And yet, if I lived in a teeny tiny town where there were no people around for intellectual stimulation, I would be really bored in probably a month. I mean, I think I'd get some really great rest and I would have some fantastic meditations. But at some point, I would start thinking, okay, what do I want to do now? And so that, like, moving from LA and moving to a tiny little town is really not the answer for me. But that feeling state is something I long for. So the question is, how do I create that feeling state in my current environment? Is it in my surroundings, in my home, in my office? What adjustments do I need to make to have that sense of inner peace? So it doesn't mean about making radical moves, and you don't want to rush the process, but you want to ask yourself, what are the qualities that make up this vision? And someone says, so start broad in the future and a funnel down to the present time. Yeah, that's a nice way of putting it. What is the broad vision? And then what are the things you have to do on a day-to-day basis? And don't discount things like meditation or prayer if that has meaning to you, or spending time with friends, having conversations and chewing things over. And that's why, you know, I have concerns about the isolation of living in a virtual world. You know, this conversation would be so much richer if we were all in a room together, because we'd be batting around ideas and questions and being able to see each other. And yet this also allows us to, you know, reach out to each other across the planet in some cases. But make sure you are talking about your vision with people that you trust. And just being in conversations that are creative for you, that create good ideas. So what is your vision for your love and your sex life? Because that's a whole different arena. And asking yourself, you know, what your preference is. Are you, you know, preferring a short-term liaison, or are you looking for a more substantive connection with somebody? Where are you in your life in terms of what you want and need in partnership and relationship right now? And be honest with yourself about that. You know, sometimes people have been in really long marriages and they come out of them and they feel a little bit like they are coming out of, you know, some sort of abusive situation, and they don't even know who they are. So the thought of getting into a relationship with someone else is just too exhausting and completely uninteresting. So have compassion for yourself if that is true for you. Don't lie to yourself because you feel some shame or obligation to date again. Whereas other people maybe have felt like they've been single for a while and they've had multiple sexual experiences and they're really ready to have a life partner. In which case, what is your vision for the kind of love and sex life you want to have? And I would encourage you to do the same thing, to sit quietly, to imagine, to think about the qualities that you want, to read some books about, you know, what sets you up for success when it comes to choosing a partner, and make that look deliberate. What would the terms of engagement be? What would be the agreements and the vows in the relationship? How would you want to organize this so that when you meet somebody and you're dating, you have already thought a lot about how you want to configure a relationship with someone? Someone says, I'm the wife of a sex addict who is having difficulty focusing on recovery for the past 3 years. I'm now separated to follow my own vision, but he is still a part of that vision if he commits. Can you speak about the balance of that? Well, I think the notion of waiting to find out if someone commits or not is sort of like falling in love with potential. So it's hard to this is a very challenging thing, I think, because in one way you're already stepping forward into the future, but you've got one hand that you're holding on to the past. And this happens with couples when they start to separate. And at some point, you have to wonder like how strongly you can hold your grip when you're reaching back like that, when the momentum in life is pulling you forward. So I think you're going to have to be really willing to not know what the future holds, and whether or not he is in your life in the way you think he should be in your life. It's quite possible he could be in your life forever, but not in the same capacity he once was. And that's about us letting go, and letting God or whatever you believe in, and seeing what unfolds, because oftentimes what we think is best for us is not best for us, or we don't know what we need because we're holding on to an old idea. So I'll give you an example. I had this black jacket that I just loved for the longest time, and a friend of mine said to me at some point, you should get rid of that. And I said, why? It's a perfectly good jacket. And she said, well, it's kind of dated and old, and it's not great. And I said, well, then I need to replace it with something, thinking I needed to replace it with the identical style black jacket. It was like a very basic black blazer. They're a dime a dozen. And she looked at me like, why are you thinking in that way? Why do you have to find like the exact replica of this thing? Why don't you toss it and see what else comes along? And I remember letting go of that thing was like letting go of like a little, blankie of some sort. And I started to sort of open the possibility of, oh, I didn't always have to wear blazers. I could wear sweaters. I could wear different things. And to my surprise, like a whole new world of possibility opened up to me at that time. And honestly, I never missed that jacket. Now, that's a little bit of a lame metaphor for a human being, I realize. And so I don't want to reduce our love relationships to clothing that's disposable. But the point is that when we let something go, we don't know what the possibility is before us, and we don't know how they're going to show up again. So I hope that answers your question about the balance of that. And so keep your preferences, or know your preferences, is what I want to say to you. Keep your attention on your intention, because all too often our attention is on a fantasy or some grandiose idea, and we forget about what our intention really is. If my intention is to have I don't want to say good life because that's so generic, but my intention is to have, let's say, a simple life where there's not a lot of drama, and where I feel like I'm doing something meaningful for my fellow, neighbor, for humanity, for human beings, and that I want to walk gently on the planet, given, that our real national emergency is climate change. And so what am I going to do? What one little thing can I do on any given day, whether it's recycling or walking or riding my bike, to make a difference about how much fossil fuel is being emitted into the atmosphere? What little thing can I do? Then my intention is, that's my intention, and then my attention has to be on that. I can't just walk out the door in the morning and get in my car and drive around like crazy without stopping and thinking, okay, what do I really need to do today? When can I walk? When can I ride my bike? When can I carpool with somebody, or something along those lines? So be mindful about keeping your attention on your intention. So your question about fantasy and vision, Let me see if I can clarify that more. Fantasy is amorphous. It can be grandiose because it doesn't have a basis in reality. So I could be in a fantasy about being, Queen Elizabeth, during the Elizabethan era, because I want to wear those kind of fantastic dresses and jewelry and headpieces. And I could spin a fantasy about that, say, for 15 minutes, and be gone, right? I'm not present. I'm not in my life. And really, there's a dissociative quality to that because there's no basis in reality. Now, if I've decided that I'm really into Renaissance fairs and like I'm a Renaissance person and I love that whole scene, then I can start to investigate Renaissance fairs. I can look at the kind of clothes they sell online that one would wear to go to one of those fairs. I can start saving money to go to a Renaissance fair and to start to get into the culture of Renaissance. Because now I'm really doing something. I'm putting something into place that is moving me towards this desire, vision I have for the type of life I want to live. So I don't know where, that's sort of a bizarre analogy, but hopefully that gives you an idea of the difference. Fantasy is amorphous, it's unrealistic, whereas vision has a basis in reality for it. It's something that if you can conceive of it, you can actually achieve of it. If you can't conceive of it, it's out of the realm of possibility for you. And I'll use the example of brain surgeon again. If I said to you, you should go be a brain surgeon, and you're like, you're out of your mind, I don't know anything about that, I have no desire to do that, I can't even imagine spending the time, energy, and doing it, the answer is no. You're not going to do anything towards creating that vision. But if I were to say to you, you should consider buying some toys and playing with them, in service of wanting to be more playful and get out of your head, you could think, oh, I can see myself doing that. And these are the things I have to put into action to make that happen. Someone, Marlene says, what is it about the brain that would know better from having spent at 20 years with an addict, realizing how small both of our lives had become, as if we were enslaved? So I'm not sure I understand that part of the question. Now one notices health and how much life was missed. How could the brain be lured to go back to small when I now see? I'm sorry, I'm sort of confused by your question. I would say if you spend 20 years with an addict and you are now realizing how small your lives became, that is not just the brain, but it's also your psychology and your nervous system in operation. And somewhere along the line, that configuration was okay for you. And you got habituated into living in that sort of isolation, and that your world had collapsed down into whatever those problems were. And you weren't seeing what you didn't see. And once you come out of that sort of fog, oftentimes when I talk to addicts, for example, that have been in their primary addiction for 15, 20 years, when they stop the behaviors, they start to have what I call a Rip Van Winkle syndrome. All of a sudden, life looks beautiful and different, and colors are more vibrant, and life is more alive. And that is a result of starting to become present and being present in the moment. And so I would venture to say that you were struggling with some sort of moderate to severe denial and dissociation while you were in that collapsed, isolative, unhealthy relationship. And when you get out of it, all of a sudden you're starting to see that there are a world of possibilities. But what precedes that is a lot of grief and loss, a lot of pain, a lot of tears. And also what's necessary is a lot of compassion for yourself for having endured that and put yourself through it. But again, somewhere along the line, you knew how to endure mental illness or endure that kind of difficulty that you learned as a child, and you don't have to endure that anymore. You now get to pick yourself up, dust yourself off, and start to look around you and say, what kind of life do I want to have now? And it's never too late. Um, with sexual addiction, effectively and appropriately date. Okay, that looks like a half a session, a half a question. So I'm not sure how to answer that question either. So I hope all of you do take the time today and this week to really consider what your vision is for your life, for your relationship, for your own health and well-being, and that you start to put some goals into action, and that you start to take those actions one day at a time. And also remember to review every day what you did accomplish today. You listened to this webinar today. That can be plenty. And to be grateful for what you do have and what you have accomplished. So again, if you have any questions or concerns about sex and love issues, call Center for Healthy Sex at 310-843-9902. I'm Dr. Alex Katehakis, and I look forward to seeing you next month. Thank you, and take good care.